Hello, it's Silver. I decided to head on back to V Rising because their first major update just dropped, and in fact it's almost expansion sized instead of just a simple update. There's a lot to it, and I definitely wanted to try it all out. And also, by the way, as you may have noticed in the title of this video, thanks to Stunlock Studios themselves, I have some extra keys that I'm going to be giving away for this game as well. More details on how to do that will be later in the video at the end, but don't worry, I made it as simple as possible. Mostly because I don't like the idea of making people jump through a bunch of hoops for a giveaway which is supposed to be fun, so there you go. So what's changed? Well, actually a whole bunch of stuff. Like I said, this is almost expansion size in terms of what it adds and what it alters, so let's just sort of go down the list here. Some of the first overhauls are focused on the castle building system, like for instance the idea that foundations don't exist anymore. Previously you had to place down your castle heart and then purchase foundations to sort of paint the area that you wanted to build in, and then you could start building within the area that you sort of purchased with foundations. That system is out, and instead now you just plop down a castle heart and it sort of automatically claims the buildable radius around it for you. So you can immediately start building and don't have to worry about placing foundations anymore. And in fact, there are now, there's a new rough flooring type that you can use to start out with. That way you can just sort of, place down your basic floor plan, and then you can specialize into more specific types of flooring later once you decide what rooms should be which. Another really big change, and one that I very much like, is that you can now build more than one floor to your castle. You'll find new sets of stairs of various shapes that you can purchase and plop in your castle, and now depending on the server variables that you're using, you can build up to 6 floors, which is pretty significant. So yeah, you can make some giant castles now, and there's now also a 5th level of the castle heart to facilitate even more claimed areas so you can build larger. This is also part of the major change to the world, because if you think about it, now that you can build multi-tiered structures, you got to think all of the castle buildable areas in the world have to be altered to actually be able to fit those structures. So all of the building areas in the game, both old and new, are now sort of altered in terms of their height maps and things to allow for this to work, and you can now build some much more complex and interesting structures, which is definitely welcome. You'll also notice that the build menu itself has changed. It is now laid out a little bit differently, and the tabs are done a little bit differently. The sort of organization is, I think it makes more sense now, honestly. I think the build menu previously was pretty much fine, like it didn't have any major serious problems or anything, but now it's even more intuitively laid out, and this is helped a lot by a lot of the new stuff, right? So you had to have some good way to organize all the new things. They've facilitated a much better system of gardening, growing stuff now, because now there are actual growing plots that you can learn how to craft. They come in different sizes and shapes, and you can plop them wherever you want and actually start growing seeds in those plots. And there's a bunch of new garden decorations like fencing and gates and stuff to make a more sort of cohesive looking garden section to your castle, especially if you want to do a sort of an alchemy garden kind of setup. There's also some more sort of quality of life stuff aside from the decorations, and by the way, there are not only a bunch of new decorations now, but there's also a sort of a combining system where if you put multiple of the same decoration close to one another, they'll actually sort of mesh into a larger one, which is pretty cool. But there's also now stuff like local teleporters, so that you can actually place different colored gates throughout your castle and be able to shift between each one quickly. That way, if you have a really complicated design or a bunch of floors or something, you need to get like straight to floor 5 because that's where all your tailoring stuff is, but you're at floor 1 because that's where all your storage stuff is. Instead of having to climb the stairs every time, you can just plop a red gate or a blue gate down on each of those floors and immediately be able to traverse long distances that way. So it's definitely a welcome addition considering the increased complexity of castles that you can make now. Traveling the world has changed a fair amount. Now you'll find a lot of the previous world areas have some new enemy types and things in them, some pretty advanced stuff later on, actually, stuff that's really quite threatening. So you'll tend to find that some once familiar areas now have a little bit of new blood in them, so to speak, pun slightly intended, that allows you to have some new and more interesting fights and things there because there's just more enemy variety in general across the world. In terms of traversal, your options have gotten a little bit better. For instance, the wolf form and the bat form, your 2 main travel forms, are now a lot faster than they used to be, so you can use them to get around a little bit quicker. It doesn't really make the world feel any smaller, which is handy. It's not that fast, but it just means that you can get around without quite as much busy work, which is nice because, hey, the world is pretty large, even more so now with the new areas. The wolf form also has a new ability on the spacebar, a new travel ability that is a leap. It can store 2 charges of this, and it's a sort of ghost leap, so it doesn't just go over things, it can actually go through some things as well. It makes you intangible for a minute. It's basically an escape slash shortcut enabling ability. It's actually really nice to have. There's also a new dominate mount form that you can get. So previously horses were sort of like temporary mounts you could just find and use occasionally, but now you can actually dominate one of them, which will turn it into a vampire horse. And once you do this, you don't have to have any upkeep like water or anything, and it's yours. You basically own it. It is much faster this way. It gets the wolf's dual leap ability that can phase through things, and you can also summon it to your location at any time, which is really nice, although the summoning spell does take a second to cast, so you're not going to be doing it in the middle of like frantic combat very easily, but still the ability to summon a very fast mount directly to you from anywhere is really useful. You'll find that progression in general has been changed a fair amount, and there's a lot of new V-Blood targets, both in the early game and new stuff in the late game, of course, too, that's been added. You'll find that there are some new tables and things as well. The crafting has been changed around a bit. There's a little bit more to it, I suppose you could say now, with a lot more different tables. Like, for instance, what was previously called the jewel crafting table has been renamed to the artisan table. It does what it used to do. It makes basically amulets for your character, although now those amulets have been upgraded with some updated art and some higher tier abilities than they had before, like for instance the ability to slow down your blood drain passively, which is nice. But now there's also a new jewel crafting table, something else that's called that because some pretty major changes have happened to the spell system of the game, and the jewel crafting table is one of the ways you can obtain these new jewels that you can actually socket into your spells to modify them. So you'll find that the overall kind of landscape of spells that's offered to you has increased dramatically now. There's a lot more flavor to them. Now every single school of magic has its own unique debuff and mechanics. Previously, some of them kind of had this, and some of them worked a little bit differently, but now across the board they all have their own unique mechanics. So previous stuff like the Ice School being able to freeze people is still there, but you've also got stuff like the Blood Magic School adding Leech, which gives you some health drain on certain hits. You've also got things like the Chaos School. It used to be called Chaos Burn, but now it's called Ignite, and it works a little bit differently. The Illusion School can weaken enemies, making them less powerful against you for a short time, some things like that. And now there's also an entirely new school of magic added, Storm Magic, so basically lightning spells and things. And they, of course, have their own debuff associated with it, the ability to electrocute and add bonus lightning damage to basic attacks and things, which makes it sort of a burst damage school. And yeah, like I mentioned earlier, there's a new jewel system, which I quite like. I love the ability to sort of modify your own skills in different ways. This is one of the reasons I'm like addicted to Path of Exile, because that's basically what the game is all about. So seeing something like that here is very much welcome. The way that it works is every type of spell except for your ultimate spells. Basically anything that goes in these travel slot or the other 2 spell slots, anything that's not an ult, has a socket, and you can find these jewels that can go into the socket, and they are spell specific. So if you want a jewel to go into your travel skill that you're using, you have to actually find one that's meant for that one skill specifically. They're not like cross-compatible between multiple. And they come in various different tiers, higher tiers of course dropping mostly from higher level bosses for the most part, although of course with the new jewel crafting table you can also craft various tiers of jewels yourself. That way you get to choose which skill they're for and avoid the RNG that way. And higher tiers basically have multiple different effects. So a tier 1 jewel will modify a skill in one way, but a tier 3 jewel will have 3 at least different modifications that it'll make to whatever skill you socket it into. So this allows for some pretty cool new build variety, which I always appreciate. And speaking of new build variety, there's also the new ancestral weapons. So occasionally when beating certain bosses of like a mid to high tier and up, they will drop these broken fragments of ancestral weapons, and once you beat a certain V-Blood target, a new one, you can unlock the Ancestral Forge, which is a relatively expensive forge to build, but once you build it, you can plop these chunks of weapons onto the forge and then combine it with some other sort of rare materials to reforge that ancestral weapon and actually be able to use it yourself. Ancestral weapons have their own unique names. They also have an extra gear score on top of the normal base weapon that they're made from. Basically, they're just a little bit stronger. They have some extra stats that base form does not have, and they will also change the first weapon skill on the Q key, and it will add one of the new spell school debuffs to that skill, which can be really useful because it gives you a way to proc some of those debuffs even if you're not necessarily using certain spells. So if you want to use an illusion spell that consumes the weaken debuff in order to do something, but you don't have any other illusion spells that cause weaken weaken, then you might be able to find an ancestral weapon that modifies its skill with the illusion debuff and use it that way. There are also 2 new weapon types that have been added that you'll be able to forge relatively early on. There are now great swords, which are of course slow but very high damage and have some like leaping and dashing attacks that tend to cover a lot of ground quite quickly. That makes them deceptively fast despite how large they are. And there's also now dual pistols, so there's another ranged option aside from the crossbow, which is definitely welcome. And the dual pistols are very fun. They can be a little bit slow on the cooldowns, but they are quite powerful and very good at like sustained single target damage. Also completely new is, of course, the new areas of Gloomrot itself, a sort of Victorian gas lamp fantasy, almost steampunkish type of setting. It's pretty great, honestly, and there's a bunch of new content in the south and north areas of Gloomrot. They are quite a high level. You'll be going to them much later on in the game, but they're full of all sorts of new V-Blood encounters. A lot of them are almost raid-like. They use a lot of attacks on the ground and a lot of using their own environment, their arena, against you in different ways, like the engineer lady that actually pulls different guns off of the ceiling to use against you and some stuff like that. They're pretty creative. I definitely really like all the new V-Blood fights. They've put a lot of effort into them, and they're more than just a dude with a big health bar. They tend to have a lot of mechanics associated with them that make them really fun to fight. So in Gloomrot, you've also got some other new content aside from just the V-Blood stuff. You've got all the new materials like tech scrap and mutant grease and some other things of that nature that allow you to make some new materials like pristine leather and radium alloy ingots for higher tier gear that you previously didn't have. And there's also a new blood type, the actual mutant blood type, which is a pretty powerful one. You'll find it on some of the tougher mutant enemies, especially. They tend to have the higher levels of it that you'd want. The mutants are definitely a hard fight a lot of the times because they tend to be very physically powerful and also have a lot of like damage over time stuff on the ground they can toss out, so you got to be careful around them. But the mutant blood type has some really nice new features, like for instance the very first thing it does is actually slows down how fast you consume the blood in the first place. So at a high percentage of purity you can burn through the new mutant blood very slowly and keep its bonuses for a long time, which is nice. And of course, in addition to the new radium alloy stuff and all the various, forges and new systems that go along with making gear from the new materials, there's also some stuff above that, like the dark silver stuff and the sort of anvil thing that you need for that you'll be getting much later. And even earlier on in the game, though, you'll see some benefits from the new crafting because not all of it is super high level. For instance, early on, you'll gain the ability to make bags, which are new. You have 4 different bag slots, and it won't be very long before you defeat the V-Blood target that allows you to make some small bags, and these can hold specific types of things. Like the small herb bag can hold, your general like plant fibers as well as all the various flowers and herbs that you can find in the game for alchemy purposes and things like that. So if you don't want to clutter up your inventory while you're out gathering a bunch of herbs and stuff for making potions, then make an herb bag or 2 and you can store them in there instead and have more free space. There's some other types of bags as well, like research bags that can hold papers and scrolls and the like. There's a gem bag for encountering all your various gems, which now have a much better use because of the new jewel crafting table. And finally, you've also got the money bag, which is really nice because it not only holds coins aside from your inventory, but silver coins can be stored in the bag without harming you. So any silver coins you have, you can actually plop in there and it doesn't count against your silver resistance and won't burn you. So this is just sort of scratching the surface, really, of all the different changes. There's like a huge, massive changelog of like 14,000 different things, I think, that you can have a look through yourself if you'd like. But the update itself is really, really solid. It has added a lot of really nice quality of life stuff, as well as a very appreciated amount of new content. It feels like a substantial update. This is the kind of update that I love to see from an early access game, right? Something that adds just a ton of new stuff, and they're not shy about enhancing every different phase of the game, from some new rebalancing to early areas to entirely new stuff at the top end of the experience, so that you have just a bunch of stuff at every phase of the game that is new and fresh and interesting to try out. So if this is indicative of what the other updates are going to be like going forward, then I've got to say I think V-Rising is going to be a very successful game, because this is a substantial and very good update that is very welcome in pretty much every way. So I mentioned some giveaway stuff. So yeah, the studio has actually given me some extra keys, 4 of them, to give away. So I have 4 copies of V-Rising that I'm going to be giving away to people, as well as 4 copies of the new Sinister Evolution pack, which is a cosmetic pack that you've actually seen a lot of the stuff from in this video. So a bunch of new decorations and things that have a sort of plague theme. They look very cool. So all you got to do to enter this is go down in the description below this video and check out the giveaway link there. It will link you to a Gleam giveaway giveaway that I've put together, and all you gotta do is put in your name and email address that you would like to be contacted at if you win, and then just visit my channel, because I had to put in some sort of action for you to do that's necessary for the giveaway. And normally I would have just made you comment or something like that, but YouTube does not like that. I can get in trouble for that, and I really don't want to bother with that sort of thing. Plus, it can involve sometimes people giving away like private information on comments and stuff, and I don't want to do that to people. So instead, I've just tried to make it as painless and as simple as possible. Just visit that link, enter your info, and you're done. That's it. And at the end of the week, I will have it randomly draw 4 winners from the selected people that have applied. So go for it. If you are interested in getting the game, you can get a copy of the game for free and some cool cosmetic DLC to go along with it, just for fun. So thank you guys very much for watching. Definitely do check out V Rising if you haven't already, because it is a survival game that someone like me, who doesn't really like survival games that much, has had a lot of fun with, because it's doing a lot of things very differently and going off in its own direction, and is unafraid to be quite bold and trying some new things, and I'm a big fan of that. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.